Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and I want to talk about the difference between a Wrought ship and a grown ship, right? Specifically for Spelljammer. So, Spelljammer Adventures in Space just dropped, and so first of all, there's so much debate and like skirmishes in the Dungeons and Dragons community about a lot of stuff, and communities that wish they were the D&D community but aren't, but are similar. Like OSR. Boy, man, they're going through a lot right now. I watched multiple videos recently about the OSR. Multiple people talking about the OSR being dead and saying, well, there was a video this week about the OSR being dead. And then they go on to talk about it for 20 minutes and don't link the video. And then they're like, well, you can find it. And when you like put in, Google OSR is dead, yeah, you can find it. There's 100 videos, spanned across the last 5 years, right? So you have no idea what they're talking about, right? But the OSR is really struggling right now. A lot of the OSR are starting to talk about abandoning the term OSR altogether, just saying like this isn't really serving us, this isn't helping us. And I kind of agree. I think the OSR it's in tatters, right? Like basically the only the OSR is just a bunch of people talking about whining about books they don't buy or read, right? Like that's not great content, right? So I get it if you think you might need a new name, right? Like, you might also need a lot of new content, right? But Spelljammer Adventures in Space, did it do well or did it not? Well, first of all, I would love to have the numbers. First of all, you're going to hear a lot of commenters out there talking about this book did bad, this book did good. The reality is we have no idea. We have no idea what the actual sales number are for a single Dungeons and Dragons book since the major changes to the Player's Handbook in 2014. We don't know the sales for a single book, right? So the reality is there's all these discussions based in ignorance, like just people saying, oh, this did good or this did well, or it didn't get bought off the local game shop at my and the reality is we just don't know, right? But actually, if you pay attention to Twitter and you pay attention to YouTube, you can get a sense, right? And I think really the success of a Dungeons and Dragons book nowadays is really seen more or less really in attention, right? And the reality is nobody ignored Spelljammer, and Spelljammer is still being talked about right now, right? And like so basically, I think about Spelljammer, right? It got huge coverage, right? And people are still talking about it. Runehammer Games, one of my favorite indie creators, they just released Etherjammer, right? And I got the entire product for nothing because I'm a Patreon supporter of Runehammer Games. And it's fantastic, and it gives some really good additional material for Spelljammer. But also, every YouTuber, talked about Spelljammer, right? Now, half of them complained about it, but they still talked about it, right? And now they're still talking about it weeks or months later, and they're saying, "Oh, here's how to fix the issue," right? So the reality is, when a Dungeons and Dragons game book does poorly, it's just forgotten. Right? And I'll tell you right now, I think Spelljammer is not forgotten, is getting a lot of play, and is getting a lot of attention still. And I look at like Radiant Citadel, that thing is done. That book did not do well. It did not engage the community. And it's on the creators, right? That book does not have, recently my Dungeon Master's like, you have a very rare magic item. Enjoy picking it. And I was like, oh, thank you so much, right? And this was treasure I got in a game, right? He's like, it's a boon of a powerful house, and they're going to give you whatever item you want. And so I just started pulling books off the shelf, right? And I'm going through, the Spelljammer book, and it's got, there are, anytime I create a new character, that book's coming off the shelf because it's got 6 brand new races in it, right? Here, I went to it to look at magic items. And also, I can choose a new spell as a magic item. There's new spells in there. Radiant Citadel, no new races, no spells, no magic items, no reason to pull that book off the shelf. That thing is DOA, right? And it's sad, right? And so I love the new Spelljammer books, okay? And one of the things that I've really been thinking about is your ship, right? There's two types of ships in it. Ships that are wrought, that are built by shipwrights, that have no organic parts and are literally just a ship that travels through space, right? Travels through wild space systems, travels through the astral sea, right? So you have that, right? And those are wrought ships. But there are also grown ships, right? Like the Illithid had this thing that, it's like a nautiloid ship, and it is grown. This ship is birthed and it grows, right? So you have grown ships and you have wrought ships in the game. And this is huge because your relationship with your ship, your player character's relationship with your ship can be different. If it's literally a living creature, the relationship is quite organic, quite literally organic, right? And you can see how your ship feels. But the reality is, even if it's wrought, right? Think of Chewbacca's relationship with the Millennium Falcon. That's a robust relationship. And so here in Dungeons & Dragons, we think about relationships between living creatures and non-living objects. Recently, my bicycle was stolen. The Blue Beast. You can actually see in many of my videos, you'll actually see it on the rack on the back, right? And I really miss it. I fret over it. Like, where is it? Like, did somebody spray paint it black? And like, is somebody riding that thing around now? I have a relationship with that object, right? Now, I was very upset because I didn't even report it to the police because I knew the police were going to do nothing, right? And because I had a friend who had a car stolen, and they did nothing for him, right? So they certainly going to care about my bicycle. But I do want to give good news. I'm an evangelical Christian, and so I asked for prayer at our small group, and I was like, hey, please pray for me because I'm upset because my bike was stolen, and this was upsetting. I've had this bike for 8 years. I've ridden it in 6 different cities, and I've hundreds of miles on it, maybe over 1,000 miles on it, and I need prayer just to manage this, right? And somebody's like, here's a new bike. I was like, okay, hey, and I actually turned them down. I was like, hey, I know you got a bike in your shed, right? Like, not brand new. I'm sorry, it's used. They're like, hey, Scott, I got this bike in my shed, and I'm like, thanks, but no thanks. And I was like, the reason why is I ride a hybrid BMX, mountain bike, right? And with big knobby tires, and and I ride extremely aggressively, right? And so your little road bike with 2-centimeter tires is not going to do it, right? And they're like, you should come see this thing, and I did. It is exactly what I ride in a better color. I was like, holy crap, I was super excited. So this relationship of. So when we play Spelljammer, we should really be thinking about our player character and what is their relationship with the ship, right? Because it could be a deep relationship if it's grown or if it's wrought. WROUGHT, right? And so we get to, and that's the other thing is like, D&D just says, it just cracks the world in half. And it's like, let's look at relationships between living people and living beings and non-living objects, right? Like, that's a deep subject. And then they're like, oh, and what if the object was living as well? Like, it's just like, I love D&D so much, and and Spelljammer is amazing, and Radiant Citadel is, I feel so bad for Radiant Citadel. That book, it just went nowhere, and I'm just thinking about it in comparison because they both came this year, and Radiant Citadel is a template for how not to write a book. You have to put value in it. You have to give a reason to pull the book off the shelf. Spelljammer, whoo! That sucker is like, it never even gets back on the shelf. It's just like on my coffee table, right? Like, Radiant Citadel is collecting dust. It's just, I don't know, man. And I feel bad about that because it shouldn't have been that way. All that's my humble opinion. I'd love to hear let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.